Atlas was not waiting for breakfast. Every dawn, before Maple Ridge had fully opened its eyes, before the first school bus hissed down the county road, and before the church bells found the hour, the German shepherd led Caleb Rowe to the same grocery store and sat outside the glass doors like he had an appointment with someone heaven had not sent back yet. He always stopped at 6:12, not 6:10, not 6:15. 6:12, beneath the weak glow of the green and white sign that read Miller's Market, his sable coat silvered by the cold morning mist, his amber eyes fixed through the glass toward Register 3. Caleb noticed the habit at first the way a tired man notices weather, without asking too many questions. Atlas liked routines. Caleb understood routines. Routines kept coffee in the cup, boots by the door, hands steady, and memories from taking up too much space before sunrise. So each morning, Caleb let the leash go slack while Atlas sat on the sidewalk beside the rubber entrance mat, silent and still, while the automatic doors remained locked and the store lights flickered awake one row at a time. Caleb stood beside him in an olive field jacket, pale face unshaven, short brown hair flattened by the damp air, shoulders still carrying the clean square shape of a United States Marine even though he had not worn the uniform in months. "Come on, boy," he would murmur. "They are not open yet." Atlas never moved. He did not paw at the door. He did not bark for food. He did not wag his tail when delivery workers passed with crates of oranges or when the smell of fresh bread slipped through the loading entrance. He only watched. Inside the store, Grace Miller, the morning cashier, saw them through the glass for nearly 2 weeks before she said a word. She was usually the first employee in, a woman in her mid-40s with tired, kind eyes, a gray cardigan over her work shirt, and a name tag polished by years of habit. At first, she thought the dog was hungry. Then she thought maybe he liked the warmth from the doors. But hunger looked different. Strays pressed close. Pets tugged toward treats. Atlas sat like a churchgoer in the last pew, patient, reverent, carrying a silence too old for a dog who simply wanted scraps. On the 15th morning, the sky was still dark blue and the streetlights hummed softly above the empty parking lot. Caleb rubbed his gloved hands together and looked down at Atlas. "You know, people are going to think we are strange." Atlas did not blink. His gaze stayed locked on Register 3. That was when Grace stepped closer from inside, holding a ring of keys and a paper cup of coffee. She paused behind the glass, studying the shepherd's face. Atlas slowly lifted his head. Not excited, not surprised, recognizing. Grace's hand froze on the lock. Her voice was muffled through the door, but Caleb heard enough to feel the morning change around him. "That dog," she whispered, "is not waiting for food." Grace did not unlock the door right away. She stood on the other side of the glass with the keys hanging from one hand, looking past Caleb and straight at Atlas as if the dog had carried a question to her feet before the sun came up. Caleb felt the leash slack in his fingers. He looked from the cashier to the shepherd, then back again. "He does this every morning," he said, though he was not sure why he felt the need to explain. Grace nodded slowly, but her eyes did not leave Atlas. "I know," she said through the glass, her voice softened by the door between them. "I started noticing last week." The lock clicked. The automatic doors slid open with a clean mechanical whisper, and warm air rolled out carrying the smell of coffee, floor cleaner, apples, and bread just taken from the small bakery oven near the back. Atlas did not step inside. He only lifted his nose, breathing in once, then sat taller. Caleb had to smile a little despite the strange tightness in his chest. "He has better manners than most people I know." Grace looked at him then, really looked. She saw the white man in the weathered field jacket, the close-cropped brown hair, the tired eyes that kept scanning the parking lot even when nothing was moving. She saw the straight posture that did not come from pride, but from training that had gone too deep to retire. "You are military," she said. Caleb gave a small nod. "Marine. Former." Grace's face changed in the smallest way, not surprise, not pity, but recognition. "My younger brother was a Marine," she said. "Long time ago." Caleb did not ask what happened. Men like him knew when a sentence carried a closed door. He only lowered his gaze and said, "I am sorry." Grace accepted it with a quiet nod, then stepped aside. "Store opens in 2 minutes. You can wait inside if you want." Caleb glanced down at Atlas. The German shepherd's attention had already returned to Register 3, visible beyond the entrance, past the produce bins, and a display of canned soup on sale. I think he wants to stay here. Grace followed the dog's gaze. Register 3 was her station, the lane closest to the front windows. There was nothing unusual about it at first glance. A scanner, a card reader, a stack of paper bags, a small bell the manager used when customers needed help. But on the narrow corkboard behind it were faded coupons, employee notices, a photograph from a 4th of July food drive, and one older picture tucked into the lower corner, sun-bleached around the edges. Caleb did not notice the picture then. He was watching Atlas. The shepherd's breathing had slowed, deep and steady, almost ceremonial. Outside, Maple Street was waking. A delivery truck backed into the side lot with a soft beep. A woman in running shoes passed with earbuds in. The sky behind the grocery store shifted from navy to pale gray, and the first line of orange light touched the roof of the pharmacy across the street. Caleb lived only half a mile away, in a small rented house with a narrow porch and a kitchen table that held more silence than meals. Since leaving the Marines, he had tried to keep life simple. Wake at 5, feed Atlas, walk the same route, buy black coffee, go home before the town expected conversation from him. Atlas had made that life bearable. He was not a service dog on paper, but paper had never been the measure of loyalty. On bad mornings, Atlas knew before Caleb did. He would press his heavy head against Caleb's knee until the old storm inside him passed. Maybe that was why Caleb trusted the dog's strange routine more than he trusted his own doubts. Grace turned the sign on the door from closed to open. Still, Atlas did not move. He sat at the threshold, eyes steady, waiting for something no one else could see. By the end of that week, Caleb had learned the shape of Atlas's silence better than he had learned the store hours. 6:12 in the morning. Same square of sidewalk. Same straight-backed posture beside the entrance mat. Same amber stare through the front glass toward Register 3. Customers began to notice, but in the careless way people notice things that do not belong to them. A retired schoolteacher smiled and called Atlas handsome. A delivery driver offered him a corner of a biscuit. A teenage stockboy joked that Miller's Market had hired security. Atlas accepted none of it. He only sat, calm as a statue, while the world moved around him with shopping carts, paper coffee cups, and sleepy voices asking where the eggs had been moved. Grace noticed more than the others. Maybe because she was always there before the store filled with noise. Maybe because grief had made her careful with small details. Her brother's photograph still sat in a drawer at home, folded behind a stack of church bulletins, and some mornings she could still remember the exact sound of his boots on their mother's porch. Loss had taught Grace that love left patterns. A favorite chair, a song on the radio, a dog sitting in the same place before sunrise. On Monday, she saw the first sign. The entrance bell chimed when she stepped outside to sweep the mat, and Atlas lowered his head as if the sound meant something sacred. He did not cower. He did not wag. He bowed, just once, then lifted his eyes again toward the register. Grace paused with the broom in both hands. "That is strange," she whispered. Caleb, holding a paper cup of black coffee, looked down at Atlas. "He has been strange since I got him." But his voice held affection, not complaint. On Wednesday, Grace saw the second sign. She had taken off her gray cardigan because the heater near the registers had kicked on too high, and when she reached into the pocket, she pulled out an old blue handkerchief she used to clean her glasses. Atlas rose so suddenly that Caleb tightened his grip on the leash. The shepherd did not lunge. He placed one front paw gently against the lower part of the glass, nose lifted, ears forward, eyes fixed on the cloth. Grace froze. The handkerchief was not special to anyone else. Faded cotton, soft from years of washing. A small white W stitched into one corner by a woman who had once brought her husband lunch every Friday. Grace had kept it after the old man stopped coming, though she had never been able to explain why. "Where did you get that?" Caleb asked. Grace folded her fingers around it. "From a customer," she said quietly. Years ago. On Friday came the third sign. The town had just begun to wake, the bakery case glowing warm behind the windows, when Atlas stepped away from Caleb and sat directly in front of the lowest corner of the glass, facing the corkboard behind Register 3. Caleb followed his gaze at last. Beneath old coupons and a faded food drive flyer was a photograph of an elderly man in a brown jacket, standing outside Miller's Market at dawn with a paper bag in one hand and a young German shepherd sitting at his side. Caleb looked from the picture to Atlas. Same proud ears. Same dark saddle across the back. Same eyes, only younger then, untouched by years of waiting. Grace came up beside him, her face pale with recognition. His name was Walter Hayes, she said. And I think your dog has been coming back for him. Caleb stared at the photograph longer than he meant to. The store moved around him in soft morning pieces, a cart wool squeaking near the produce aisle, coffee dripping into a glass pot, Grace's register humming awake beneath her hands. But all of it seemed far away now. The picture on the corkboard held the whole room still. Walter Hayes stood outside the same doors, older, thin, kind-eyed, wearing a brown canvas jacket and a dark cap pulled low against the cold. Beside him sat a younger Atlas, proud and alert, his sable coat richer than, his ears sharp against the pale dawn. Caleb felt something tighten behind his ribs. That is him, he said, though he barely recognized his own voice. Grace nodded. I thought so. Atlas sat below the picture, looking up through the glass with a stillness that made the morning feel almost holy. Caleb crouched beside him and rested a hand on the shepherd's back. Under the fur, Atlas was calm. Not excited. Not confused. Calm in the way a person becomes calm when they finally reach a grave, a chapel, or the porch of a home they thought they would never see again. Tell me about Walter, Caleb said. Grace folded the blue handkerchief slowly in her hands. For a moment, she looked younger and older at the same time. He used to come in before sunrise, she said. Every day? 6:12. Always 6:12. Caleb looked down at Atlas. The time landed hard. Grace continued softly, keeping her voice low so the first customers would not hear too much of what did not belong to them. Walter lived out past the water tower, in a white farmhouse with a gravel drive and a mailbox shaped like a barn. He had no children in town, no family who came by often, but he knew every cashier by name and always bought the same 3 things: a small loaf of bakery bread, a can of soup, and a black coffee with 2 sugars. He paid in exact change whenever he could. Then he would step outside, sit on the bench by the entrance, tear off the first piece of bread, and give it to the German shepherd waiting beside him. He called him Captain, Grace said, and Atlas's ears lifted at the old name. Caleb felt the dog's body respond beneath his hand, not with joy exactly, but with recognition so deep it seemed to come from before language. Grace saw it too. Her eyes filled, though she blinked it back. That was his name then. Caleb swallowed. How did he end up in a shelter? Grace looked toward the parking lot where the morning mist still clung low over the asphalt. Walter got sick. Not all at once. Little things first. Forgetting his keys. Leaving groceries at the counter. Coming in with his coat buttoned wrong. He tried to hide it because proud men always think silence is strength. Caleb looked away because the words touched something in him. Grace stepped closer to the corkboard and removed the photograph carefully from its corner. One winter morning, he came in alone. No dog. I asked where Captain was. Walter smiled like he was trying not to break, and said, Some friends are too loyal to watch us disappear. A week later, he was gone from the farmhouse. Family came from out of state. The dog was sent to a rescue network. After that, nobody knew. Atlas lowered his head until his nose nearly touched the floor. Caleb knelt beside him, feeling the weight of years his dog had carried quietly through strangers, kennels, paperwork, and new names. Grace held out the photograph. I kept this because something told me the story was not finished. Caleb took it with both hands. Outside, the sunrise struck the glass doors, and for one breath, the old picture and the living dog seemed to share the same light. The next morning, rain came before daylight, soft at first, then steady enough to silver the street and turn the gutters along Maple Street into narrow streams. Caleb woke at 5, the same as always, but the house felt different around him. The photograph Grace had given him lay on the kitchen table beside his black coffee, and every time he looked at it, he saw 2 versions of the same dog separated by years, one young beside Walter Hayes, one gray-muzzled and sleeping near Caleb's boots. Atlas lifted his head before the leash even came off the hook. He knew the hour. Caleb knew it too, but something in him resisted. Not out of cruelty. Out of a tired wish to spare the dog from waiting in the rain for a man who would not come back. Not today, Caleb said quietly. Atlas stood near the front door, ears forward, amber eyes steady. Caleb pulled on his field jacket and clipped the leash, but instead of turning right toward Miller's Market, He turned left toward the quieter road by the church. Atlas took 3 steps, then stopped. No pulling, no barking, no drama. He simply planted his paws on the wet sidewalk and looked back toward the grocery store, half a mile away, where the sign would soon be glowing in the gray dawn. Rain gathered along the dark fur of his back. Caleb felt the leash tighten only because he had kept walking. He stopped too. "Atlas," he said, not as a command, more like a plea of his own. "You do not have to keep doing this." The German shepherd lowered himself onto the sidewalk. Water darkened the concrete around him. His gaze remained fixed down Maple Street, past the closed barber shop, past the pharmacy, past the empty crosswalk where traffic lights blinked red into the rain. Caleb crouched in front of him, one knee touching the damp ground. "Walter is gone, boy." The words came out gentler than he expected, and still they hurt. Atlas slowly turned his head. He placed his muzzle into Caleb's palm and gave a small sound, low and broken, not disagreement, not confusion, but something closer to insistence. Then he looked again toward Miller's Market. Caleb closed his eyes for a second. He knew that kind of waiting. Not waiting for a person to return. Waiting for a part of yourself to become brave enough to follow. When he opened his eyes, he saw Grace standing under the grocery store awning in the distance, a gray umbrella in one hand, watching them from across the quiet street. She must have come early. Maybe she had guessed Atlas would try. Maybe grief had trained her to arrive before anyone asked for help. Caleb rose slowly. "All right," he whispered. "We go together." Atlas stood at once, not excited, only relieved, and walked beside him through the rain with the leash loose again. When they reached the store, Grace opened the door before the automatic sensor could do its work. Warm light spilled onto the wet sidewalk. Her cardigan was damp at the shoulders, and the blue handkerchief was tucked in her hand. "I think I know what he has been waiting for," she said. Caleb looked down at Atlas, then back at her. The shepherd sat at the threshold, rain dripping from his coat, eyes lifted not to the bread case, not to the register, but to Grace's closed fist. She unfolded the blue cloth carefully, and inside it was a small brass key, dulled by age, tied with a paper tag in old handwriting. "For the soldier who brings him back." Caleb looked at the key in Grace's open hand, and for a moment the grocery store seemed to hold its breath around them. The rain whispered against the awning. Fluorescent lights hummed above the empty checkout lanes. Somewhere near the bakery, the morning oven clicked and warmed, filling the air with the gentle smell of bread. Atlas sat between Caleb and Grace with water beading along his sable coat, his gaze fixed on the brass key as if he had known all along that the morning was leading here. Caleb did not reach for it right away. "Where did you get that?" he asked. Grace folded the blue handkerchief around her fingers, careful not to hide the tag. "Walter left it with me," she said. "Not directly. He gave it to Mr. Miller, the old owner, years ago. After Mr. Miller passed, his daughter found it in the office safe with a note asking that it stay here." Caleb read the words again. "For the soldier who brings him back." The handwriting was faded, but steady, each letter pressed with the kind of care older men used when they believed paper might outlive them. "I am not sure I understand," Caleb said. Grace gave him a sad, gentle look. "Neither did I. Not until Atlas came." The old office sat behind the customer service counter, a cramped room that smelled of receipt paper, dust, and coffee grounds. Grace led them there before the first customers arrived. Atlas walked slowly, not sniffing the aisles, not distracted by the stacked cans or the bakery case, only following the key. Caleb noticed how the dog's paws made almost no sound on the polished tile. Like a visitor in a place he remembered, Grace unlocked a small filing cabinet in the corner with the brass key. The drawer resisted, then opened with a soft scrape. Inside was a plain white envelope, yellowed at the edges, with the same careful handwriting across the front. "To the one who gives Captain a home." Caleb felt Atlas lean against his leg. The old name had returned again, not replacing Atlas, but revealing the life that came before. Grace handed Caleb the envelope. "Walter must have known someone would come one day," she whispered. Caleb took it as if it were something breakable. His thumb rested on the flap. He thought of the shelter where he first met Atlas, the narrow run, the way the dog had not begged or barked, only watched Caleb as if measuring whether this quiet Marine could carry what others had left behind. He opened the envelope. Inside was one page and a small photograph. The photograph showed Walter sitting on the bench outside Miller's Market at sunrise, one hand resting on the head of the young German shepherd beside him. On the back, Walter had written, "He always gets the first piece." Caleb unfolded the letter. The first line was simple. "If this dog has brought you here, then he has decided you are safe enough to know where kindness began." Caleb's throat tightened. Grace turned away slightly, giving him room. The letter explained that Walter had found the shepherd on a cold morning near the edge of town, frightened, hungry, and too proud to ask for help. Walter had named him Captain because even then the dog carried himself like he was responsible for something larger than his own survival. Every dawn after that, they came to Miller's Market together. Bread, coffee, bench, first piece. A ritual small enough for strangers to ignore, sacred enough for a dog to remember. Caleb looked down. Atlas had lowered his head, eyes half closed, listening to a voice no longer in the room. The final line of the letter rested on the page like a hand placed gently over a wound. "He may lead you here because he misses me, but do not mistake grief for emptiness. A loyal dog returns to old light when the person beside him needs help finding his own." Caleb read the last line twice, then a third time, while the rain kept tapping softly against the high window of the office. A loyal dog returns to old light when the person beside him needs help finding his own. The words did not accuse him. That was what made them harder to hold. They simply waited there, patient and true, like Atlas had waited outside the store every morning. Caleb lowered the letter and looked through the office doorway toward Register 3, the bench beyond the glass, the wet sidewalk shining under the store lights. He had thought he was bringing Atlas on a walk. He had thought he was the one giving the dog a steady home, a leash, a bowl, a place at the foot of the bed. But maybe Atlas had been leading him just as carefully, one dawn at a time, back toward a world where people still remembered kindness by name. Grace stood near the filing cabinet, quiet, the blue handkerchief folded between her palms. "Walter used to say that store lights looked like little promises before sunrise," she said. Caleb looked at her. "You knew him well." Grace smiled faintly. "Well enough to know he was lonely. Well enough to know he tried not to show it." Her eyes moved to Atlas. "My brother was the same way when he came home. Always helping everyone else carry groceries, fix porches, change tires. Never telling anyone when he needed someone to sit with him." Caleb looked down at his hands. He recognized the shape of that kind of silence. He had worn it like a second jacket since leaving the Marines. Keep moving. Keep useful. Keep the coffee black and the answers short. Let no one see where the heart still limped. Atlas stepped closer and nudged Caleb's wrist. The touch was warm, deliberate, ordinary enough to keep the moment from breaking him. Caleb folded Walter's letter and placed it back on the desk beside the photograph. "I thought he was waiting for Walter," he said. Grace nodded. Maybe part of him was. Caleb looked toward the front of the store. The first customers were arriving now, shaking umbrellas, rubbing their hands against the cold, reaching for carts without noticing the small office where an old promise had just opened. "But that is not all," Caleb whispered. Atlas turned and walked out of the office. Not fast, not anxious. He simply led them through the short hallway, past the customer service counter, past the rows of canned goods and cereal boxes, until he reached the front doors. There, beside the entrance, he stopped at the bench Walter once used. The bench was still there, weathered but sturdy, tucked under the awning where rain could not reach the seat. Atlas sat in front of it, then looked back at Caleb. Grace covered her mouth with one hand. Caleb stepped outside into the damp morning and sat on the bench. The wood was cold beneath him. The store window reflected his face back at him, pale, tired, older than 36 in the eyes. Atlas placed his head on Caleb's knee the way he did on bad mornings at home. For the first time, Caleb did not look away from the reflection. He saw a man who had survived by staying guarded, and a dog who had crossed years of loss to bring him to a place where tenderness had once been practiced daily. Grace came out carrying a small loaf from the bakery, still warm in its paper sleeve. Without asking, she handed it to Caleb. He tore off the first piece and held it in his palm. Atlas looked at the bread, then at Caleb, waiting, not for food, for permission to let the old ritual become new. Caleb's voice broke softly. "For Walter," he said. Atlas took the bread gently, and the morning seemed to breathe again. After that morning, the rain did not feel quite as cold. Caleb sat on Walter's old bench with the warm bread in his hands and Atlas close beside his knee, while Grace stood under the awning and watched the street brighten by degrees. Cars began to pull into the lot. A man in a work vest hurried past with his collar turned up. A mother guided two sleepy children through the automatic doors. The day began doing what days always do, moving forward without asking whether anyone was ready. But Caleb did not move for several minutes. He kept one hand on Atlas's head and the other around Walter's letter folded safely inside his jacket pocket. The word stayed with him. Old light. His own. He had spent months trying to make peace by keeping life small. Same house. Same route. Same black coffee. Same few words to strangers. It had seemed safe, but safety without warmth was only another kind of locked room. Atlas had known. Maybe not in the way people know facts, dates, or names, but in the deeper way dogs know what a human heart is trying to hide. He had led Caleb to this store not to drag him backward, but to show him that kindness once lived here in something as simple as bread shared before sunrise. Grace sat at the other end of the bench, leaving space between them, not because she was distant, but because she understood silence needed room. My brother would have liked him, she said softly, nodding toward Atlas. Caleb looked over. Your brother? Grace smiled at the wet sidewalk. Nathan. He came home quiet too. Everyone kept saying he was strong. I wish someone had told him he was allowed to be tired. Caleb let those words settle. A delivery truck rolled by, tires hissing through rainwater. Atlas rested his chin on Caleb's boot. People say strong when they do not know what else to say, Caleb answered. Grace nodded. And dogs do what people are afraid to do. They stay. For the first time since he had met her, Caleb saw that Grace had been keeping her own kind of dawn watch. Opening the store early, polishing the same counter, holding on to Walter's blue handkerchief and a key she did not understand. Maybe everyone who had loved someone gone became a keeper of small things. A photograph, a bench, a certain hour, a dog's old name. Caleb tore another small piece of bread, but this time he did not offer it to Atlas right away. He held it in his palm, looking at the steam rising faintly into the cool air. I thought I was giving him a home, he said. Grace looked at Atlas. Maybe he was giving you one back. Caleb lowered his hand. Atlas took the bread with his usual careful gentleness, then leaned against Caleb's leg with a quiet weight that felt like agreement. Inside Miller's Market, Register 3 blinked awake for the first transaction of the morning. Outside, the clouds thinned just enough for a pale ribbon of sunlight to touch the glass doors, the bench, the shepherd's wet fur, and Caleb's open hand. Nothing dramatic happened. No crowd gathered. No one applauded. But something in Caleb loosened. A door inside him, closed for longer than he could remember, opened by an inch. And sometimes an inch is where grace begins. By the following week, the bench outside Miller's Market no longer looked like a place where someone had vanished. She never made a show of it. She simply placed it beside the rubber mat, wiped the rim with a clean towel, and went back to Register 3 as the store lights came on. Caleb and Atlas still arrived at 6:12, but the feeling had changed. He always tore off the first piece and held it low for Atlas. The German shepherd took it gently, then looked up at Caleb, not past him, not through him, not toward a door that would not open, but at him. That was the miracle Caleb had almost missed. Not that Atlas remembered Walter. Of course he did. Loyal hearts remember. The miracle was that Atlas had known how to carry memory without letting it become a cage. One gray morning, Caleb brought a small frame from home and handed it to Grace. Inside was a copy of Walter's photograph, the old man on the bench, young Captain at his side, sunrise caught in the store glass behind them. Grace placed it on the narrow shelf behind Register 3, beside the blue handkerchief folded neatly in a small wooden tray. Customers noticed eventually. Some asked. Grace told only enough. A kind man. A faithful dog. A morning ritual worth keeping. That was all the story needed in public. The rest belonged to Caleb, Atlas, Grace, and the quiet space between dawn and opening time. As days passed, Caleb found himself speaking more. A nod became a sentence. A sentence became coffee shared under the awning. He helped an older woman load groceries into her trunk. He learned the delivery driver's name. He stopped leaving the store so quickly, as if being seen were not a threat, but a small form of mercy. Atlas watched it all with patient amber eyes, the way dogs watch seeds become green things. Then one morning, sunlight broke clean over the pharmacy roof and filled the parking lot with gold. Caleb sat on Walter's bench. Grace stood by the door, and Atlas rested his head against Caleb's knee after taking the first piece of bread. No one said much. Nothing needed to be solved anymore. The waiting had become gratitude. The old name had become a blessing. And as the grocery store doors opened behind them, Caleb understood that some souls do not bring us back to the past to leave us there. They bring us back just long enough to show us where kindness began, then walk beside us into the morning.